All right, proving lines parallel. So this section, the reason I combined it with the construction section is because it's very much like we talked about yesterday. Yesterday we said if two lines are parallel, then you know some things about the angles created by the transversals. So what you have been given in that if-then statement is the fact that the lines are parallel. If they're parallel, then, and then you have all of these things that you know. Corresponding angles are congruent. Alternate exterior are congruent. Alternate interior are congruent. Consecutive interior are supplementary. So you know all of these because you have been handed the information that the lines are parallel. This section just takes the converse. So what is the converse? Way back from, I don't know, your test last week. The converse just flips the hypothesis and the conclusion. So now instead of telling you up front the lines are parallel, and then you can say, okay, then I know these things are true, what they're saying is the converse is also true. If corresponding angles are congruent, then you can conclude that the lines are parallel. If alternate interior angles are congruent, then you can conclude that the lines are parallel. So what this is telling you in this section is every one of those converses is also true. So if you have parallel lines, you can make the conclusion that certain angles are congruent. And if you have certain angles are congruent, you can make the conclusion that the lines are parallel. They both work. They work both directions. And that's what this first one is, the converse of the corresponding angle. And so they give the example. Now, instead of telling you that these lines are parallel, they are telling you that these angles are congruent. If these angles are congruent, I can now assume that these lines are indeed parallel. And so that's all of the converses that they give you on the next page. The converse of alternate interior, alternate exterior, and consecutive interior. If you are given the information that those angles are congruent, or for the consecutive, supplementary, then you can go back and conclude that the lines themselves are parallel. So either way they give it to you, you can go back and forth with those. This is a little bit different. If two lines are perpendicular to the same transversal, then they are parallel. So if two lines are perpendicular to the same line, then those two lines must be parallel as well. And then the last one has nothing to do with the converse of the other ones. It's just telling transitivity works for parallel as well. So if A is parallel to B and B is parallel to C, then A is parallel to C. All right? So let's look at this example. Find the value of X that makes these lines parallel. The value that makes them parallel. All right? So the first thing you want to determine is what type of angles do I have here? If these are two lines and this is a transversal. So no matter what, the relationship exists. So what is the relationship between these two? What type of angle relationship is that?
They're equal. They're congruent.
We don't know that because they didn't tell us they're parallel. But what's the name of those angles? Alternate interior, exterior, corresponding. What are they? What are these? Corresponding. They're on the same side of the transversal and the same side of the two lines. These are corresponding. So if those were parallel, it means they have to be congruent. So they're asking what value of X then would make these lines parallel? Well, whatever makes these equal. And so if these are corresponding, for these two lines to be parallel, we have to figure out what X is by doing exactly what we would do with the other problems. Solving the problem is the same. They're just asking the question a different way. So instead of saying these two lines are parallel, find X, they are saying find the X that would make these lines parallel. It is the same question worded a different way. I just want you to be familiar with the wording so that when you get it, you know what to do with it. So how do I solve this algebraically? What do I do? So I'm going to move 4x over, and I am going to also move my 8 over. Variables on one side, numbers on the other. 6 minus 4 gives me my 2. 17, do they give me a decimal here? Of course, 25. So X equals 12.5. If X is 12.5, those two lines are parallel. Because if X is 12.5, those two angles are congruent. And if those two angles are congruent, those lines are parallel. All right, they're asking the same question, worded differently. All right, turn to page 117 in your books. The first set of questions, 4 through 7, which conclusion can be made from each statement? They've given you 4 different statements and 4 different options, A, B, C, and D up there. You're going to look at the statement, And then you are going to look and tell me which of those statements which conclusion can be made from the statement they give you. For the next one, it says which lines can be proved parallel given the angles congruent. So you have multiple sets of lines and transversals, and you're going to determine which lines can be determined to be parallel from that. So try all of those, 4 through 7, and then 8 and 10. Right, the first thing you may want to do when you have something like this is just establish which lines that they're talking about. So what I mean by that is AB parallel to CD. So A is talking about these right here. And then AD parallel to BC is talking about these. So make sure you get a visual on which ones you're talking about. All right. So number 4, angle 1 congruent to angle 5. What type of angles are they and for which lines? What type of angles are they? We know they're congruent, right? What type of angles are they? Are they corresponding, alternate interior, alternate exterior, or consecutive interior? It's harder to tell when they have multiple. I would go alternate interior probably. To which lines? Alternate interior. So you have to look at it, different perspective. This line and this line have a transversal going this way, right? So these are alternate, and they're on the inside of those lines, right? So which lines would be parallel if those two are congruent? These two, right? So for that one, you should have gotten B. B. All right? It makes it more difficult when they have multiple transversals, by the way. All right, let's look at 2 and 6. 2 and 6. All right? So now they want us to look at 2 and 6. These are also alternate interior, but for which lines? Yeah, so now we're talking about these two lines with a transversal this way. Alternate interior. Everybody see that? Alternate interior. So then that would be A. All right, A. This means A is parallel. All right, let's look at the next one. For this one, they are telling us that 2 is congruent to 3. 2 is congruent to 3. What's the angle relationship, or is there one? There's not one, okay? Those are actually created by 2 different transversals, right? So the 2 is created by this transversal AC. The 3 is created by this transversal BD. There is no relationship between that. They are the same because this is a rectangle, and as we get earlier, we'll discover that rectangles do something interesting with diagonals, but has nothing to do with a transversal and parallel lines, okay? So for this one, you cannot determine either. You cannot determine either. Let's look at the last one here. For this one, they're telling us that 3 is congruent to 7 and that 2 is congruent to 6. All right? So 3 and 7, what type of angles are those? 3 and 7. 3 and 7, what are those? They're alternate interior for this transversal, right? What about 2 and 6? Also alternate interior for this transversal. It's 2 different transversals, but which lines are they making parallel? This is also just A, by the way. That wasn't both. All right, because that's actually 2 different transversals for the same line. So this is a transversal for ABDC, alternate interior. This is a transversal for ABDC, alternate interior. So that is just A. 1 is congruent to 5. 1 is congruent to 5. All right, so angle 1 to angle 5. What type of angles would those be? They're on the same side of the transversal. Same side of the transversal, so they're not alternate. So the only options are either consecutive, interior, or corresponding. Corresponding. These are your 2 lines, right? And this is your transversal. Okay? Corresponding. So then that would prove that A and B are congruent, or parallel rather, not congruent. So this is going to prove that A is parallel to B. All right, let's look at the last one. All right, if it'll let me erase all of that, that'd be great. All right, for the last one, they have that angle 10 is congruent to angle 16. What type of angles are those? 10 and 16. Alternate exterior. So my two lines are A and B again. My transversal is D. So that's the same answer for that one. A is parallel to B.